Welcome back, everybody. We're going to copy a drawing by Adriaen van Velde. Probably saying that wrong. A Dutch animal and landscape painter, son of William van de Velde the Elder, brother of Willem van de Velde the Younger. Those were both marine painters. They did seascapes, and Adriaen did not want to become a marine painter, so he trained in landscape. But what we're going to look at today, after a glance at some of his paintings, is there's one. There's a seaside painting, family business. We're going to look at a figure drawing by him. So without further ado, we're going to go over here. This is in the Metropolitan Museum again. This is called A Young Girl Walking to the Left, mid-17th century. So, this is going to be useful to think about doing, for me, slightly more or less sight size. So, I'm going to think about blocking out about how big the head has to be. And just for the sake of instruction, I think I'm going to do a little bit of measuring today. So give me a second while I find my tools here. So you'll have to trust me on this, but I measured the height of her head and her overall height from the top of her head to the bottom of her heel. And I have a ratio of exactly 1 to 7.5. Remember, 7.5 heads tall is an average human height. So you can give an impression of great size to somebody by making them closer to 8 heads tall, but 7.5 is not unusual for just the average person. So I'm going to use this old Home Depot receipt, and I think I'm going to make my head size like this. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5. So remember, that is the distance to the bottom of this heel. And we would anticipate that her center would be right about here. Let me check that with my ruler that you cannot see. And yeah, that's center right there. So center is 1, 2, 3 3/4 of the way down. So we're going to leave this here. This is important. Anytime you're drawing a whole figure, you want to start by finding the middle. Nothing is more important than that in terms of proportion. Okay, now I'm going to start the drawing. And let's think about, this is a really simple head. It's not quite 3/4 view, so I'm going to really think about it just in terms of a profile skull. And sort of block in some of the main landmarks. Because her head is kind of thrown back, we don't have as much of a movement forward of the neck, but we do have some. Can you see that? So we're going to move the neck that way. Let me check my focus here. It seems a little off. Okay, and we'll lock that. That's better. Why don't I just go ahead and sketch in some of the masses the way I'm going to be thinking of them. And hopefully that'll help you. So, this is the mass of the head. I'm thinking of that in terms of a profile skull. That's the movement of the neck. We're going to conceptualize the rib cage on a slight tilt going this way. And we're going to think about the pelvis tilting the other way like this. This is the center point, so that's where we want to imagine the greater trochanter of the femur. There's the iliac crest, and notice that this leg is locked, maybe even slightly hyperextended. The knee should be about here. Remember, it's about 2 heads to the, from the knee to the bottom of the heel, and then if we imagine where that other leg is, it's going to be back here. So what we don't want to do is get thrown off by this gathering of cloth here. The main movement of the body is always this sort of S-curve, so we're going to be going this way, and then down. So let's try to draw that. And let me just do one more thing before I start with that. We're going to think about the center of balance, which is from the inside of the ear straight down to the weight-bearing foot. So, see this? This is going to be our line that we're going to build this figure around. That nice vertical line. And to get my drawing a little more sight size, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. That's better. Okay. So we've got rib cage, pelvis, and movement here is straight right down to the heel. There's that foot coming out towards us. Notice that the other foot is way up here in the picture plane. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say she's got some pretty big arms here. I don't know if that's the artist trying to convey a sense of what we might imagine to be like a muscular kind of peasant woman or girl, or if it's a mistake. But I would say this forearm looks a little bit big. Notice how it's really about the same length as the lower leg, which would be an unusually long arm. So that's sort of my gesture. And now I'm going to start thinking about it a little differently and work on what I've called in the past crating. Crating is when you start to think about the simplest kind of is blocking the contours. So you go back to my straight line tool. Actually, let me just erase everything first. So when we're crating, we're thinking about the simplest box that this figure could fit in. So we're thinking about all the shapes kind of like this. And obviously you can't outline things like this when you're drawing a live model, but this is how I want you to try to think about it next time you have that opportunity. So notice I'm cutting off the nose here. The crate does not have to follow every contour. This is what a lot of artists call just blocking things in. And it's helpful, as I said before, to think about, look for lines that are parallel to each other. See how this movement is similar to this movement? This movement here is similar to this movement at the front of the waist. This movement here is similar to this movement. This is just straight up and down. And this one tips in a little. I don't always develop my drawings this way. This is more often the way I will check a drawing for mistakes, but since we haven't done much of this, I want you to do it with me this way, because I think it will reduce the chance that you'll make any big mistakes here. I'm doing all this much darker than I would recommend you do it. I'm just trying to make it so you can see what I'm up to here. And notice that at this stage we're not dealing with the inside contours, just the outside shapes. I'm trying to make sure everything's sort of balanced the right way. And checking my work, I can see that this angle here is a little shallow, or a little steep. I mean, it should be more a shallow angle like this. And looking back and forth, which I hope you're doing also, feeling like that's about where I want things to be, although I'm also noticing now that the head is a little deeper front to back. Very common error because we think of heads the way they look from the front. And we usually have a hard time believing just how much space they occupy front to back. So, once I'm happy with my basic construction, which is what I would call this, I like to go right into, let me clean this up. Go right into detail in the head because I find that it's so much easier to make sure everything else is in correct proportion if the head is drawn correctly. So we're going to zoom in now. Okay, and I'm going to erase my crate. I'm going to bring my camera a little closer so I can get these to be the same size. And we're going to do the head now. Notice that I really missed, in my crating, I kind of missed this movement here. Let me lock my focus again for you. And I'm going to do what we've been doing here and try starting with the shadow map very faintly. This is obviously a right-handed artist, and I'm going to try to alter my shading direction to conform to that. See what that does immediately? It sort of just gives a sense that we're looking at a volume here. And I'm going to have to place the ear a little differently. And again, I'm going to look for this shadow shape under the ear and connect it to this shadow at the back of the neck. And I'm even going to shadow map the whole back of the head. And I'm going to add this little bun, which I didn't put in my original crate. So I'm thinking that it's really tricky. This is really just about exactly vertical from the chin to the brow ridge. It's pretty much what I've got here, so I should be able to work with that. Notice the brow ridge is really high because of the head being tipped back. And notice that little eye is really high too. It's like, it's not centered on the head. It's way high because of the So we're looking up at this head. I need to pull out a little more in the philtrum. And see how that little tiny bit of shadow at the corner of the mouth really alters the expression. So the nose could be a little more delicate, right? When I look at my drawing, it looks like, also it looks like she's pulling her mouth down a little. So maybe I just need to lift the nose a little bit, like that. See these little really minuscule adjustments really make a difference in these tiny portraits. Raise the nostril a little more, like a pencil point width. Throw a little shadow at the bottom of the nose, and now the nose is a little shorter. I'm just going to raise the line between the lips. Again, the smallest amount. Until it feels like the scale and likeness are both approximately correct. In my drawing, she looks a little just kind of dubious. Which again is probably that little tiny pocket of shadow at the corner of the mouth. Can you see that? It's sort of the difference between her looking more or less happy and her looking concerned. Notice this contour right here is pretty hard and definite, but the contour of the bridge of the nose is very, very weak because it's a light background and a light surface. So that's far from perfect, but it's gonna have to do for now. Use that little curl. And now the ear. I've got my shadow marked in. tragus. Not much of an antitragus. Here's the helix curling around. And then this whole central portion is in shadow. See, this is sort of side of the pencil toning right here. And this was my original crate that's sort of getting in the way now. Okay, now if we back out again, you're going to see that having done something with the head, it's really a lot easier to see how the rest of the proportions are looking. I'm going to skip over some of this drapery for now and go right to the forearm. So the hand, let me slide this down so we can still see the head while we're doing this. So we're going to start the forearm right here. Notice that this front of the sleeve sort of lines up with the back of the dress there. And this sort of comes up and around. And this swells here and then tapers. See that? Tapers for a good while before we get all the way to the wrist. There's where the transition to the wrist is. Erase my crate. And here's the top of the thumb. And notice that the hand is longer than you think because it's going under this piece of drapery. And it's falling into shadow here. So, and we can zoom in on this because this is really beautifully done. You see how this finger transitions to this knuckle, one last knuckle showing, and then this shadow map is what shows the form of those knuckles. See this little upward and downward movement of the shadow edge. Now the forearm that I drew looks a little too wide, so I'm just going to trim away a little bit on this side. But I also want to remain aware that it's going to look narrower after I shadow map it. So that shadow map is going to follow the form Notice it doesn't follow it exactly because this artist is aware of the different muscle groups of the forearm, and you see how it dives down a little here. That's the part of the wrist bone. And I can't really see a shading direction here, but I'm just going to use the side of my pencil. And notice that once you put that shadow in, the form doesn't look as wide. While we're here, let's shadow map this drapery under the arm. That'll be a really easy place to start with drapery. So here's this division right at the back of the hand. There's another division right inside the knuckles, another one to the left of that. And then we're going to do this cast shadow. And you see how the cast shadow moves up and over all these contours of the cloth. Like that. And I'm going to use that kind of flat tonal shading again. Notice again here you can't read a shading direction, so you can do whatever you're comfortable with. And then that lovely reflected light at the bottom of the form is going to come out when we darken this cast shadow right where the arm hits it, like this. And also darken a little through the core shadow up above. So we're going to back out again, see how things are looking. I kind of missed this little shadow accent. See that right there, right at the top of the neck, where it meets the throat. And now we're going to fill in between what we just did with the arm and the neck. So let me do some broad outlines first. All this fabric is really beautifully drawn in a way that I don't feel like I'm going to be able to quite do justice to, but I'm also not quite familiar with this style of dress. I think this is called a bodice, but having shadows. So those are some of the main contours that I can see. And this sort of folds over the upper part of the sleeve and then comes around behind. That's all pretty dark. And the point of the elbow is way back here, and then this wraps around the bottom of the forearm like that. I am going to try to follow the shading direction here on the bodice because it sort of shows the direction the form's moving pretty well. There's a really impressive kind of delicacy to some of the folds up in there that I'm not even going to try to get. And having put in my main shadows, which are back here, and my contours, the last step is going to be, oh, here's another main shadow right here. Last step is going to be the halftones. It's important that you always press much lighter when you do the halftones. You don't want them to compete with the shadows. Here's another shadow. Press a little harder. And now we move down here to this big shadow shape, sort of an S-curve. I'm just mapping and shading as I map. And remember, that was just part of the block end, but I'm going to try to do it a little more justice now. See how the thumb is sort of bunching up this fabric here. And this entire thing has sort of a round feeling to it. So notice the difference again. This is a shadow here, dark. This is also a shadow. There's a little core shadow right here. Can you see that? To bring out that fold. This is shadow, a little piece of shadow up here. A little shadow under here. And over here, these are halftones. This is not true shadow. So we want to use a much lighter touch over here. These are little indentations in the fabric that are all in the light until we get right back to that corner. There's a little piece of shadow there. it's really easy to darken your halftones too much when you're drawing fabric because these little halftones tend to be surrounded by bright light, so they tend to look much, much brighter than they really are. See this little cast shadow here? It kind of smoothly goes from a cast shadow into the form shadow and then into the core shadow up there. And we already did this cast shadow. Missed a little piece right there. And we're going to work our way down here. And notice this is all true shadow back here. And this is a shadow piece here. Almost shadow, maybe a little halftony. And this is a definite strong cast shadow right along here. So we're going to zip through some of this stuff. The really important thing to get is that this is all darker than everything over here. Look at the really lovely sort of turn of the cloth here. We could spend a long time on these details, but we're not going to. I don't want this demo to go much over an hour. As usual, I'll give you a link to the original image on the Met Museum's website so that you can go into more detail if you want. So if you forget a little light like I just did, you can, it's not cheating, and take out your eraser and lift it back out. In fact, that can be a quicker way to handle some of these complex drapery shadow shapes. And finally, we've got this whole area here, this lovely sort of inverted cone shape. Notice I'm just sort of taking all those creating lines and turning them into S curves, because that's what I'm seeing here. And the crate is just all that blocking out. It just gives you a general sense of where your S curve needs to go, and then you can very easily create accurate curves if you have the blocking done correctly. And shadow map this. There's the bottom of that shadow. And again, using the side of my pencil. And right here I'm going to follow his direction, which seems to be sort of following the form. See how he's sort of done a few overlapping curves there. He was looking for the form and didn't bother erasing his first tries. That's something you see a lot in old master drawings. And this is all just halftone on this side. So first shading, and then just a little darker through the core shadow to get that cylindrical movement. And moving down, see this other cylinder form. It sort of wraps around the shin and then it creates its own little secondary bulge. With a cast shadow on this side. Form shadow over here. And bring this light a little closer to this curvy form here. And now it looks like somehow my feet don't look big enough. Well, they are unusually small in the original, but I'm going to go ahead and let myself do a little correction there. So I've got this. That was where the heel was supposed to be. So I'm going to let this foot come down a little further towards me before I do any details. And this one somehow doesn't come out far enough. That was a mistake in the first step of this drawing, because see, if I pull a vertical up from the back of the heel, you see how I end up right about where the elbow is, and in this drawing, see where my heel ended up. So that's an easy thing to fix. Just pull that heel a little bit to the right, and then that foot ends up sliding in there. And I always like to really study the whenever you see legs or feet that are close together like this, it's really a good idea to study the negative shape that is created between them. And just think of that, as I've said in the past, just like the shape of a country or something. So we've got this here. And see what I'm doing? I'm just drawing that negative shape, which meant pulling up a little bit on this cloth. There's the cast shadow on that leg. Here's the cast shadow on the ground. finally the feet. So in a standing figure, notice the feet are always coming towards you a little. That means they're always foreshortened, and that always gives people out of trouble. So it can help to just think in terms of a crate again. Like, don't think of this as a foot. Think of, what is this shape? What are its proportions? And how much wider is it than it is tall? Let's just sort of try to block in that shape the same way. Like that. And the same goes for the other foot, which is going to be this kind of a shape. And there's the arch and to the heel. So start like that. Don't draw toes. Don't think about feet. Don't look at your own feet and try to figure out what feet look like, because it's not going to help you. You just think about it as a shape, then shadow map it. Put the shadows in. Ultimately, it helps to know a little bit of the anatomy of what's going on here, but that's beyond anything that we're trying to accomplish today. And finally, the toes. The big toe is by far the largest. Second toe is the longest. And as we move to the right, they sort of get smaller and more angled. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It really helps if you can see the toenails, but we really can't see them much in this drawing, so except for the big toe. So we're just going to leave it like that. And on this one, we've got the big toe on the inside again. And we can see a couple overlaps behind it. And the whole foot on this side is in shadow, so we're going to put a tone over it. Like that. Okay. So the one thing I could really do to make this a little better is clean up my construction lines on the light side of this foot slash shin, lower leg. And then pull a little more of a dark into this core shadow. And you see how that little deepening of shadow right near the edge helps bring the form towards us a little and make it more believable. So this is going to be hard for me as a lefty. But to finish your drawing, I do want you to throw in some of these tones. Use the side of your pencil, but oops, good to erase construction lines first, because you can't erase them later. Oh, I just noticed I missed this whole halftone under the elbow. as I said, we could spend, 2 or 3 hours on this, and I encourage you to spend some extra time and see what you can learn from this, but um, okay, final assessment now. And I really could go a little darker on the bun here. Look at how dark he goes right through here. Really think about your contours on the shadow side as being much darker than your contours on the light side. More definite. And that'll do it for today.